There was no item of value within the courier's backpack. Searching through it, he found what remained of an old tin lunchbox and flask. The uses and values of such items had long been lost, along with any form of care and attention. Beneath them, at the very bottom of the bag, lied a once neatly folded, grey jumpsuit. Time had left it torn and stained, like so many other things in the world. Its tears and stitching left a lot to be desired in such a piece of clothing. Despite this, the courier had a somewhat unreasonable sentimental attachment to the thing, which made the act of leaving it to rot in the dirt to be a task he couldn't perform. He surveyed his surroundings. A quick 360-degree turn revealed no signs of life. With only the distant wind to keep him company, he felt isolated, alone, just the way he liked it. He raised his left arm and double-checked his location on his wrist device. According to the map, he still had quite some way until he reached Paradise Falls. With the sun on the horizon now disappearing into the distance, his time was growing short. He dismantled his leather armor as it fell to the floor, kicking up a pile of dirt. As each strap loosened, he could feel his weight decrease, giving him a more free and flexible feeling. It was a moment he wanted to savor, but had already wasted enough time. If he was to get there before nightfall, he would have to press on. He wasn't sure what would happen once he got there. He had heard stories, but hadn't experienced or seen any of it firsthand. He was no stranger towards trouble. He never went out of his way to find it, but somehow it found its way to him. Despite this, trouble wasn't something he was interested in. The more he thought about it, the more he considered passing up the idea of stopping by. Supplies were low, but it wasn't anything he couldn't find if he looked hard enough. Even in his desperate state, he still had plenty of options open to him. He could take the risk and pass up on his visit, but then again, entering would come with its own risks. He began to weigh the pros and cons of both scenarios. With the orange glow in the sky and the groan in his stomach, the courier's time became more valued than ever. He would need to make a decision soon. He wanted to press forwards and ignore his body's call for water. Just about any water would do at this point. Better if it was a sealed bottle of Nuka-Cola. He could imagine the ice-cold bottle in his hand as he would twist off the cap, giving off that oh-so-satisfying sound of air escaping, indicating not only the refreshment being free for him to drink, but also having an extra bottle cap to spend. He had only ever had Nuka-Cola a few times, but whenever he would see the old vending machines, it wouldn't stop him from searching for any left over from the past 200 years. If he was lucky, they may even have a few bottles to sell at Paradise, if he was ever going to get there. How much would they charge? Would they have a bottle of Nuka Quantum lying around? He had only heard rumours about the drink, a blue gem that could illuminate entire buildings with its glow. He had heard that the taste was unmatched, a flavour that could never be beaten, but never actually had the chance to try one for himself. He had his doubts that tonight would be the night.
Hold it right there. Nobody's allowed into Paradise Falls except on slaver business, and I get to decide what qualifies as slaver business.
The courier was suddenly jerked out of his trail of thought. Had he been daydreaming? How much time had passed? Was this really the place he had been looking for? Despite the voice's impatient tone, the courier was too confused to think of an immediate response. His head began to spin, his throat was sore and his legs struggled to support his weight without energy. The courier found himself at the makeshift gates of a settlement, completely alien to him. It seemed to have been built in the same manner as Megaton, but it had a far less welcome feel to it. Rusted metal cars had been stacked one on top of another, which formed what looked to be a near impenetrable fort. 2 guards stood above its gate, holding rifles, staring down at him as if he was their next meal. The most disturbing part was the cages either side of the tremendous gate, that each held a human skeleton within. Bodies were a common sight in the wasteland, there was nothing new there. But for someone to take the time to create such a tool was frightening to think about. Directly in front of the courier, he noticed a tall, well-built man. His low voice added to his intimidating demeanor. It didn't matter though. He must have been at least 15 feet away from the courier, and no matter how built he was, he wouldn't survive a few shots to the chest. The courier didn't want to cause violence, even if it was often unavoidable, but he had no intention on shooting the man. However, if his trigger finger was to get the better of him, he would soon be facing off against the two guards that were overhead. Not only that, but his reaction time must have been halved from his exhaustion. Even if he was faster on the draw, there was little to no chance of him actually landing a hit. This seemed to be a scenario where words were his preferred weapon of choice, but it was unknown if the feeling was mutual between them both. The courier opened his mouth, but all that came out was a stutter. I just came to do some trading. You guys got any ammo or food?
Go on, piss off already, or do you want to get shot?
The courier let out a sigh as he began to look back in the direction he came from. Deep down, he wanted an excuse to pass up the idea of entering, but now that he was so close, it almost seemed foolish to give up the only salvation in sight. The courier raised his brow at the sudden idea that jumped to mind. He turned once again to the guard and raised his wrist to show off the device attached to it. I'm sure your boss would be interested in this Pip-Boy I have. Perhaps he would want to trade it for a night's rest. Maybe a drink? The tension built as he awaited a response. His exhaustion wasn't helped by the speed of his heart rate in the moment. The guard let off a grunt as he nodded to the direction of the entrance of Paradise Falls. The courier took this as an indication that he gained entry. He hurried along, not wanting to test the man's patience. Just as he passed, he felt a heavy hand gripped hard on his shoulder, pulling him back slightly.
Friendly warning. Don't act like a jackass. You won't get a second chance.
With those words, the courier was suddenly brought back down to earth. He had one chance. Get in and out. No questions asked. He wasn't sure if it was butterflies in his stomach, or the feeling of hunger creeping back up on him. The sooner he was done here, the sooner he could progress to Boston. The first thing he noticed upon entering was the sound of cries echoing through the air. He hadn't noticed it outside. Were those walls preventing even their screams from escaping? Or had he been so distracted that he hadn't noticed them? Regardless, this was hardly the time to ponder such a thought. He could sense a sudden shift in atmosphere once he entered. There was a certain chill in the air, despite the courier almost sweating with anxiety given his current predicament. The wasteland was an unforgiving place, but even out there seemed like the real paradise when compared to in here. There were cages formed from barbed wire and old shopping carts that contained their prisoners. Paradise Falls was known for its business in the slave trade. It was a topic most would simply prefer not to think about. To see it firsthand made him feel more nervous for himself as opposed to feeling sympathy for those in the cages. Slaves sat in the dirt, reaching out, pleading, begging for his help as he walked past without acknowledgement. He could hear the buzzing of the electric collars that each and every slave wore around their neck. It was a far cry from an accessory. It was necessary for slavers who wanted absolute order and control. For if the slaves had decided to do anything other than sit and obey, the collars were designed to detonate, taking the wearer's head with it. It was the only way to ensure full mandatory cooperation, thus creating the most ruthless and effective slave settlement in the wasteland. He paid no attention to their pleas. He needed to stay focused. If he gave off the wrong impression, he could find himself thrown in with them next. He darted his eyes all around. It wasn't much of a settlement. It seemed like it had been built to serve the bare minimum of the slaves themselves, let alone the ones they had in cages. Most of the surrounding buildings had been converted into pens, or had been devastated beyond the point of worthwhile salvage. He came to a halt, pondering whether or not coming here was a good idea. Even with his starvation increasing, it wasn't worth him risking more than just his life on entering. In his opinion, being among those in the pens seemed a fate far worse than death. But he hadn't arrived planning on joining them, and he would rather leave than ask anyone who surrounded him for any sort of help. Before he could think anything through with more care, he was interrupted by a voice coming seemingly from behind his ear.
You're not from around here, are you?
The courier turned to face a young woman, right around his age, staring at him from inside one of the cages. Unlike the rest, she seemed to have room to move around, and her enclosure was far cleaner and newer than the others. She was leaning on the fence with her right shoulder, with her feet crossed over. Unlike the other slaves, she didn't seem to be reaching out to him, or crying, just simply trying to make conversation. Despite her casual appearance, it actually made the courier more cautious as he took a step back to observe her. Long brown hair that was tied behind with a shoelace, a grey vest and cargo pants reaching down to her presumably steel-toe boots. Her face seemed cleaner than anyone else in the settlement. Even the slavers hadn't been this clean. She wasn't bruised or had any noticeable scars or any visual injuries for that matter. Something else, however, stood out about her. Something he hadn't noticed until that very moment. She didn't wear a collar like the rest. She seemed like a perfectly normal person. The courier raised an eyebrow as he began to focus more intently on the girl. There was something different about her. A certain curiosity poked at his mind. He would have continued walking, but he felt the obligatory need to answer her question. You think? And tell me, how exactly would you know where I'm from? He questioned, maintaining the distance between them. She scanned him for a second, almost mimicking what he had done. It was true, no matter who he was, where he came from. He didn't fit in, and even he knew that much.
I know you're not from around here, that's for sure. I can see the look on your face. Beard shaved recently, clean hands. Almost looks like you've walked right out of one of them vaults. Either that or towards Tenpenny Tower.
The courier rubbed his chin, where he felt the sharp bristles rub against his palm from a couple of days without shaving.
Oh, and that fish out of water look? Yeah, dead giveaway.
The courier actually felt a little insulted by her observation being more accurate than he had hoped. Two could play at that game, however. And what about you? You're not a slave. Bruises on your knuckles, not thin enough to be starving. I think you pissed off the wrong guy. What are you? A raider, perhaps? That would explain why you're a prisoner, and I'm assuming they couldn't decide what to do with you yet. Her brow lowered as she tilted her head sideways at his theory. The courier was definitely onto something, but it seemed to be a stretch from the truth. She stopped leaning on her side and switched to her right hand. The eye contact between them intensified.
Not that it matters anyway. We both might as well be stuck in here now.
Oh really? No, I can come and go as I please. I don't think these guys would want to lay a finger on me. The courier stated, almost bragging being stood on the other side of the fence.
You're going to die in here. At least if these guys see you trying the tough guy attitude. Heck, I think the slaves will have better odds in a fight than you. Look around you. This place is built to keep people in. And once that gate closes in an hour, you may be joining us. I suggest you leave now.
Instead of taking her advice like one side of his mind was screaming for him to do, the courier instead took a step closer, intrigued by the woman. He began to lean on the fence the same way she had originally. "Why are you in here?" he asked, as his eyes scanned the fence that divided them.
I can get out anytime I want. I'm just waiting for the right moment.
That doesn't exactly answer my question. And when is the right moment? Are the guards just gonna let you slip past them? Unless you got yourself a stealth boy, then good luck. The courier taunted, as the girl leaned in slightly closer and said in an almost whisper,
If you get me one, I'll repay you.
Really? I doubt that. Someone who pissed off slavers so bad that they locked her up is not someone I want to bargain with. What could you possibly have to repay me with anyway? The woman looked around cautiously, wondering if they had any unwanted ears listening in on their conversation.
Keep it down, will ya? I'm sure we can figure something out.
I need supplies. Ammo, food, caps. Can you offer me any of those? I doubt you have any of that.
Do you think I've got any of that on me right now? But I can make you a deal. Food? Yeah. Ammo? A little. Caps? Not really. I was holed up at a super duper mark a few weeks back with my guys. I left my share of food in a safe. A week's worth, mind you.
The courier took a moment to ponder the idea of her story. He didn't need a week's worth, but right now, it seemed to be his only option. How can I trust you on this? I get you out and there's no super duper mart. You're gone and now I have half of paradise on my ass for the rest of my life.
Look, you help me, I help you. That food? It's yours if you get me one of the stealth boys. After we're done, you go your way, I'll go mine. Sound like a plan?
The courier passed the idea through his head once more. He wasn't one to believe in karma, but helping out this single person might just be enough to keep him going in the long term. Okay, I'll bite. Now where do I get a stealth boy?
Funny you ask. A slave had one confiscated from them a couple days ago. Chances are it's for sale. Since you said you need caps, you might have to use your bartering skill on whoever has it. Between you and me, I don't think any of these guys know what a stealth boy actually is. Meaning it would have likely ended up with the clinic.
So I should speak to the clinic then. Okay, sounds easy enough, I'll get it done. Though you better hold up your end of the bargain. He reached his hand through a small gap in the mesh fence. She took his hand and gripped it hard.
What's your name?
Name's Jack. And you?
Name's Sarah. Clock's ticking, Jack.